The global economy has been battling with a lot for the past 2 years. First, the COVID-19 pandemic, which wreaked havoc on human capital, disrupted supply chain systems, and practically paused all commercial activities. Incidentally, as the world starts recovering and commercial activities resume, another disruptive event started, that is the Russia-Ukraine war. And this has also impacted negatively on economic activities. A new round of worldwide scarcity of commodities is being felt across the globe and in almost every nation of the earth. In response, the Central Bank of Egypt on Thursday raised its overnight interest rates by 200 basis points, seeking to contain inflation expectations after prices soared by the quickest in 3 years. It cited an increase in annual urban inflation to 13.1% in April from 10.5% in March, its highest since May 2019. Now, the South African Reserve Bank's called SARB's Monetary Policy Committee increased the repo rate by 50% basis points to 4.75%. The committee was split 4-1, with 4 members opting for the 50 BPS hike and 1 preferring a 25 BPS move. The SA rand hit a 2-week high against the dollar after the decision was announced. Now, Africa's largest economy will start deliberations of its MPC today in Abuja. Will they hold the current rates or also become hawkish? You get to stay tuned even as we look at Africa's Monetary Policy Committee meetings. This is Business Edge. I am Lekan Onabanjo, standing in for Tolulope Adelere Balogun. Joining me from here in Lagos, Nigeria is Abiodun Kayode-Alli. He's an economist and tax manager at PwC Nigeria. Good morning to you, Abiodun. Thanks so much for joining us on Business Edge. Well, Abiodun, you might have to unmute yourself. We can hardly hear you. Unmute your mic.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Lekan. Thank you for having me.
Okay, beautiful. So now currency depreciation and rising wheat costs during the Ukraine conflict was said to have pushed up prices in Egypt. But with the rate hike that Egypt has announced now, raising up to about 200 basis points, do you think it will actually cushion the pressure on the Egyptian economy?
Okay, yeah, thank you for having me once again, Lekan. So, yes, like you rightly said, most of these economies, advanced economies around the world, and even those in Africa here home, they've started increasing rates. So Egypt's stance basically is quite understandable. So at the moment, apart from just increasing its rates, its interest rates by that amount, it's 200 basis points, what it has also done is that it has allowed the currency to be depreciated, right? There's that depreciation which happened in March. Now, the idea is that the Egyptian economy is trying to be competitive, right? It's trying to attract investors because if you remember, I think sometimes this month, about 2 weeks ago, there was this comment, right, that most African nations, right, most developing nations would actually face the hit that is going to come from the policy normalization of advanced economies. The Bank of England, as well as the Fed, they've raised their rates. Now, what the implication of this is that you're going to see a situation whereby hot money, foreign portfolio investors are moving their money to these particular regions. And if you think about it, the risk is actually low in these advanced economies. So what Egypt is doing is actually a sensible move to actually attract investment into the Egyptian economy. So to a reasonable extent, it does make sense. And they're also trying to curb inflation. Although you might think of it from the perspective of this inflation they're talking about, more of it is coming from supply shocks, right? Because the Egyptian economy is highly dependent on imports. In fact, the wheat that it's imported is actually coming from Russia. And given the tensions, like you rightly mentioned, it has impacted on their import. So to a reasonable extent, it might attract investors, but it might not be the total solution to their problem. They would also have to carry out some structural reforms, right, which is what they are currently doing. Some of the things they are doing at the moment is that they are trying to encourage the private sector. In addition to that, they are also trying to ensure localization of industries just to promote production, right, and kind of cater for their needs domestically. So I think to a reasonable extent, since Egypt operates a liberalized economies, I think we'll see a lot of foreign portfolio investments moving over to the Egyptian economy. So it does make sense.
So the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, of course, have been advising African countries to increase the rates and tighten their budgets. Now, from your own perspective and what you think, would you say that this is actually a viable response to the global economic shock?
Yes, it does make a lot of sense, right? Like you rightly said, increasing the rates is simply going to attract foreign portfolio investors, right? Because investors are looking for where they can earn high returns, right, on their investment. That's one. Then in terms of tightening the budget, now the thing here is most of these developing nations, they are highly indebted, right? They're highly indebted at the moment. So one thing that is quite useful for them is that they have to try as much as they can to be efficient when it comes to public expenditure, right? And they also need to be efficient when it comes to raising revenue. They need to use leverage on technology. They need to leverage on data, right? So, like you rightly said, it's the IMF's, most of these development organizations, international development organizations, it's part of the recommendations they've given them. And I think further to that, one thing that is also important is that they've tried to warn them against giving out subsidies, right, indiscriminately. So those subsidies actually, part of the warning they've given is that those subsidies have to be targeted at the vulnerable poor, right? Those who are actually feeling the heat of these things, the needy, right? And not just for everyone, right? So I think it's in line with most of the recommendations given by the IMF, and it does make a lot of sense. So that's my take. Then if you look at it from Nigeria's perspective, which I believe you would want us to talk about later, I think it's something we also need to do in terms of being targeted in the way we give out our subsidies. So yes.
Well, definitely we are coming to Nigeria, but then let's quickly touch down at South Africa. The country actually increased the repo rate at the end of its SARS MPC meeting by 50 basis points. And even the bank governor said that he expects headline inflation to return closer to the midpoint in the fourth quarter of 2024. Now, can the economy accommodate such tightening in the next 2 years?
Okay, so yeah, the South African increase in rates, right? So this is actually the steepest and the highest they've done. I think as far as if you go far back as 2016, it's actually the highest. Can they be able to maintain this? Well, if you look at the issues that South Africa have been facing, there's been this pressure. There's been this pressure for increase in wages. They've had issues with the flooding, which has actually affected production. And like I said earlier, most of these issues are actually structural, but to some extent, there is also that desire. There's also that desire to attract investments, right? Which is one of the key reasons why most of these African nations are actually raising their rates. And if you think about it, it's just in a bid to ensure that foreign portfolio investors also look at their economy, right? So raising the rate, I think it's something they can maintain, right, over the next 2 years. I think it's something they can maintain. But I think more key is actually has to do with structural reforms. I think that is very key for South Africa. And if you also consider the wage, right, the wage hike right now, there is a lot of the wage hike simply means that they will be in need of money, right? And if there is too much money in circulation, right, what it simply means is that you are going to have a lot of money chasing after few goods. So it does make sense to hike those rates so that you can have a situation whereby individuals now keep their money in the banks or probably invest that money and they can earn returns. So it kind of deals with the money supply in the economy. So I do think it's a reasonable move as well by the South African Reserve Bank. Yes.
So then, what would the hike in rates have to do with the consumer inflation? How would it affect consumer inflation in South Africa? Because according to reports, it is running to about 5.9% in annual terms, looking at April, between April and March, when what they actually thought was between 3 and 6%. So what impact do you think this current rate would have on an average South African? And what is the correlation between hiking the rate and the consumer inflation in that country?
Okay, so the hike in the rates. First of all, what it simply means, there is the side, there is the aspect where you need to consider that it simply means that there is going to be a ripple effect. So generally, when the South African Reserve Bank, when they actually hike rates, what it simply means is that there is going to be an increase in the cost of lending. Right, there's going to be an increase in the cost of lending. So probably if they've tried to get loans, right, if they've taken mortgages, the implication is that it's going to impact on the interest rates they are going to be paying for such mortgages, right? But if you also want to look at it from the consumer themselves, what it's going to do is that it's going to encourage investments. It's going to encourage savings. Now, you might begin to think about it that the consumer, if you look at a consumer's disposable income, right, most of what they actually spend their money on has to do with consumption on basic food items, right? And at this extent, you might begin to wonder that would it really have that impact in terms of savings? Most of these consumers would still want to go ahead and purchase those basic items, those basic necessities. So from my own stance, I think it's going to impact them more from the side of probably paying for their interest or paying for their mortgages. I think it's going to impact them more on that side than more from the side of savings. But the idea generally is that it's meant to encourage savings. But if, like I said initially, if you think about it, what exactly is the cause of the inflation that most of the world is going through? It's coming more from what's it called? It's coming more from the global shocks, right? It's coming more from the supply shocks that we have in the economy globally, right? The Russia-Ukraine tensions. So what I just think basically is that that might not actually be the best move, but like what most economists are trying to do, they are trying to show that they have a control of inflation expectation, right? Because one thing that is important is that you're not just considering inflation, the actual inflation. What you're also considering is expected inflation. And the idea is that investors want to see that can you truly control expected inflation or inflation expectations. Now, the thing is, by the time investors want to come into your economy, one thing they are keen on is that inflation, is it something that is stable? Is it something that they can plan around? Because most investors want to plan. They want to anticipate that if they're going to invest in this economy, they're going to earn returns, and this is probably the rate of inflation. They can factor it in, right? But if it now gets to a point whereby it's unstable, right, that's when you now see a kind of drop in investment. And what the SARB is simply trying to do is that they are trying to give that signaling effect that yes, they do have control. So that's why they're actually raising the rates. But when you now look at it in terms of the consumer, I think it's going to impact the consumer. It's going to hit them hard. That's what I think for the South African economy.
All right, that's good. Well, let's quickly go on a break now. When we return, we get to look at what NPC, that is in Nigeria, what they are doing or what they would do in terms of coming out of their meeting and making some policy decisions and how it would affect Nigeria's economy. But then you just get to stay with us for a while, and I will be back with you, Abiodun. Thank you so much. Now, top drivers of the African economy in different regions are struggling to keep up with inflation occasioned by the Russia-Ukraine crisis while gradually smarting out of the aftershocks of the pandemic. Nigeria, being a major player in the continent's trade, is also suffering from the pangs amidst scarcities. Now, will it follow current trends and hike interest rates to also stay afloat? Well, we get to find out at the other side of this break from our guests, definitely. So you get to stay with us, and we'll be right back. Still with me is Abiodun Kayode-Alli, an economist and tax manager at PwC Nigeria, and we have been considering Africa's monetary policy committee meetings, and what decisions they will take in mitigating the impact of the global economic crisis being experienced all over. So let me just go back to Abiodun right now, and even as we touch down in Nigeria, Abiodun, now Nigeria is starting its MPC meeting today. What are your expectations? What are the things you think they would come up with in order to deal with this economic crisis?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lekan. So, the two things that I did make mention of is that they will be caught between deciding whether to go for growth or whether they should go for tackling inflation. All right. So these are the concerns that would actually be considered by the MPC when they have their meeting today and tomorrow. Now, one thing you must realize is that the MPC, they've actually been pro-growth, right? And if you consider the growth that we had in 2021, which was 3.4%, one thing that we all recognize is that that growth is actually fragile, right? And it came as a result of the impact of the pandemic, which was pretty much the same for most economies of the world, right? But at the moment, what would the MPC want to consider? What they said in their last MPC meeting communique was that the heightening, the hawkish stance, right, trying to tighten the system by increasing rates, it's definitely going to lead to high cost of borrowing, right? Whereas if you loosen it, which we don't expect they would, but if you maintain it, it's expected that this would kind of encourage borrowings, and it's also encourage economic activities in terms of production and employment, things like that. So what would I expect the MPC to do? I think, for my own view, I think the MPC would want to think about living rates as they are at the moment. Because the thing is that if you look at Nigeria's economy, similar to most other economies in Africa, it's coming from a supply side shock. Right, it's coming from a supply side shock. It's coming from insecurity as well. Then, if you even consider the inflation that we had, the most recent figure of inflation that we had, 16.8%, some of the things that drove it actually had to do with insecurity and the increase in energy prices, which actually trickled down to Nigeria, right? So if you look at all these things, these are more of the supply side. Though you might argue that there's also a lot of money in circulation at the moment, right? When you think about we're in a pre-election year, right? But I still think that it's more likely that the MPC is actually going to consider holding the rate. And if they are going to want to increase it, right, they might want to do it by just a marginal percentage. But right now, so these are the issues that they will be considering. And I know that similar to the meeting that they had in March, they would want to consider some intervention policies to kind of assist and support the supply side challenges that we're going through. But most importantly, there will be a need for the fiscal side to back up. But what do I think they will be doing right now? I think they might want to go for a hold today and tomorrow.
Well, I like the fact that you said that Nigeria is pro-growth when it comes to making policies and exerting them. Of course, to a large extent, the country has been immune to external shocks in the past, but that was dented by the 2008 market crash. So would you tell us, what would you say led to this?
Sorry, could you come with the question again?
Okay, so what I said was that we understand the fact that Nigeria has made so many decisions and come up with ingenious ways of being immune to external shocks in terms of its economy. But then that was affected briefly in 2008 by a market crash. So would you tell us why that actually affected Nigeria so much so that it had not been able to keep up with speed?
Okay, yeah. So the impact of the global events that has trickled down to most economies of the world, it's something that Nigeria was actually not immune, right? Nigeria has actually not been immune, but all the same, I think there are some internal policies that we've taken that hasn't helped us to actually improve in terms of performance, right? So if you think about it, most of the time it happens that we've had structural issues when it comes to production, when it comes to exports. We've had issues such as infrastructure, right? When you look at it from terms of power, when you look at it in terms of even what we have at the ports, right? A lot of these factors are more of government policies that seems to like drag us back for every step that we take, every policy measure that we take to go forward, we're actually taking steps that are actually bringing us backward, right? If you consider some of the taxes that the government is even introducing, right? So I think one thing that is key for the Nigerian economy is that there needs to be that enabling environment. Because if you look at it, a lot of investors want to come into the economy. They want to invest, right? But most of them, they do complain about the ease of doing business, right? How practical is it for you to set up your business and actually do business in Nigeria, right? So there's been lots of challenges with policy direction, and we've had lots of fantastic plans. But when it comes to implementation, you hardly see these things being done, right? And if you consider it during this period, right, from 2008 up till now, there are some large players that have come into the sector, and some of them have left, right? Some of them have gone to neighboring countries. So I think the policy environment is one of those things that is actually stalling us from performing as we ought to, right? And if you also want to think about it, one other thing that investors have actually complained about has to do with forex, the FX challenges, right? The constraints when it comes to moving out money. Right. Since we had our recession in 2016, we've had a lot of foreign liquidity that was trapped in the country, right? So some of these things are actually issues, they're actually things of concern, right, for investors. So I think these are some of the policy measures that we've taken that are actually impacting on us. And not to even talk of the August 2019 closing of the border, which Nigeria took in a bid to actually stabilize and actually ensure that we no longer have imports coming through the border. We no longer have smuggling coming through the border. But the question is, what has been the impact of this thing? Even though there has been stimulation in terms of production, local production, that has also led to hike in prices, right? Because were we sufficient in the first instance? So I think some of the policy measures that we take are some of the things that actually hinder us.
So basically, if they can get the policies right, then definitely they'll be able to tackle these insufficiencies that you've talked about, and all these challenges will be definitely come to an end. All right, thank you so much, Abiodun Kayode-Alli. It's been nice having you join us on Business Edge. Really appreciate your presence.
Thank you for having me, Lekan.
All right. So, in the face of economic threats and scarce commodities, conversations are ongoing by a monetary policy committee in some African countries, also in Nigeria, on the possibility of raising in order to contain inflation expectations. Now, it is, however, pertinent to know that depending on the peculiarities of these countries, it is expedient that their decisions are rightfully fit to help mitigate the impact of the challenges recorded on the global market. So let's quickly run off on this break now. And when we return, we get to bring you NC4 to watch. Looking at top 4 trending stories on NC4 to watch. Let's start by telling you that Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi signed a law to increase the state budget in the 2021-2022 fiscal year that ends in June by 6 billion Egyptian pounds. That's about $329 million, state news agency MENA reported on Sunday. We take you to South Africa now. Now, the rand was slightly stronger early on Monday, supported by ratings agency S&P, which is upgrading the country's sovereign outlook to positive. At 07:15 GMT, the rand traded at 15.83 against the dollar, less than 0.1% firmer than its previous close. Let's tell you about Bitcoin. Now, the largest cryptocurrency rose as much as 1.8% to $30,450 on Monday morning in Asia. That's after it fell for 7 straight weeks, the longest losing streak since August 2011, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. That echoed the 7-week decline in the S&P 500. And finally, crude oil rose to the start of the week as investors weighed tight product markets and a weaker dollar against concerns over global growth. WTI for July delivery rose 0.6% to $110.90 per barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange at 11:12 a.m. in Singapore. Brent, on the other hand, for July settlements added 0.7% to $113.37 a barrel on the ICE Futures Europe Exchange. And that's it on today's edition of Business Edge. Do not forget that you can visit our social media platforms at New Central TV to check on all the conversations that they have for you. You can also download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store, and also visit our website, www.newcentral.africa. My name is Lekan Onabanjo. See you some other time.